Um, all right. Well, I am excited today on the Factory Futurist to have Mari here with us. She is quite the renowned speaker and author of the new book, The Thriving Hive: How People-Centered Workplaces. Sorry, let me. What was the rest of the title there?
How people-centric workplaces ignite engagement and fuel results.
Fantastic. So we'll be getting into her book a little bit, but I think it's a very timely piece here. We want to talk a lot about engagement and motivation, especially in the industrial work environment. We have a lot of facilities that are probably struggling with low engagement, and we've been seeing people having to kind of hazard pay their workers to keep them engaged. So I'm excited to get her thoughts on that. But before we get into all things coronavirus, I do want to just find out a little bit more about you personally. So can you just give us a little bit about your backstory?
Well, I'm a business professional, and I have spent my entire career in business. So the work that I do today in the field of workplace well-being has come from my experience of being a burnt-out road warrior. I spent about 2 years consulting as an independent consultant, and I was traveling 100% of the time for almost 2 years. You know, you love to get on planes, Drew, but in this case, getting on a plane every single week and not getting home sometimes not getting home for 10 days. I did that for almost 2 years, and I just said, this life sucks. This is not what I want to do with my life. And so I, sought help to find a new career, and, it's over 15 years now. It brought me here to workplace well-being. And I, just love doing work that has impact in people's lives. And I know that's creating a better world in which we can all live.
Oh, that's absolutely thrilling. So when did you found your company?
About 15 years ago. So when I made this career change, I actually went back to school to earn a master's in health promotion. Somehow I didn't think an MBA was enough I wanted something that was more tied to a health related area. So I went back to school and earned a master's in health promotion and started my company right after that.
So in the last couple of months, has your business changed at all, or your vision for the business changed?
Well, it certainly has. Everything's changed. Our world has changed. Yeah. So everybody's business is impacted by this. Either, you're trying to figure out how to keep your business alive, or your business has, reached its highest expectations because everybody's got, demands for your business. So it seems like there's just extremes at this point. And I've been working with one of my projects that I've undertaken is working with wellness managers and well-being managers in hospitals and convening a weekly meeting with them to help them share resources. So it was my way of being able to support them and give back to them. And we've got about 25 hospital systems from around the country that are participating on those calls each week. And if we were to add up all the headcount of those institutions, I'd say we probably had a couple 100,000 employees that are being touched by, those wellness managers in those organizations.
Wow, that is phenomenal. Can you share just what the agenda for a meeting looks like for that?
Yeah, well, actually, we're just focusing on what their priorities are. And it's been interesting because we've been doing this for a little over a month. I think we've had 5 calls now. And, so watching it change has been the interesting piece. Early on, it was, just how do we, what are the kinds of things we can do and respond to help be able to help the frontline staffs really just take care of themselves. What support do they need? What kind of communication needs to take place about what resources are available? So part of it was marshaling resources and making sure that they were able to communicate what those resources are. Now it's starting to be more of the looking ahead. Where do we go from here? With big concerns really about being primarily around mental well-being. Is how are individuals going to be able to, how can the organization support the frontline folks in the hospital systems. Because you remember, in hospital systems, you get lots of different kinds of jobs. You've got clinicians, you've got parking lot attendants who are probably out of work right now. You've got food service people, you've got housekeepers. There's a whole range of jobs within a hospital system. And so people are impacted very differently across that system. So really, how do you start to have what you need in place to help people going forward? As in many cases, with the hospitals that have been on these calls, the peak has started to subside, although that does range across the country. But for the most part, they're not exceeding capacity or anything like that. And the other big concern is job stability and job insecurity. Hospitals make money on expensive things like surgeries and those kinds of things that bring in the revenue, and they're not getting any of that revenue now. So the financial impact to the hospital systems has been quite profound. And so many of those systems are now really trying to figure out how do they move forward and how do they get back to their revenue models that are going to keep them going.
I want to pick up on that looking ahead piece. Actually, let's focus on you a little bit longer, and then we'll go into what your advice is kind of moving forward. So you've been doing this kind of you're doing consulting before that, but 15 years kind of starting up your own business. So in that entrepreneurial crush, if you will, how have you kind of taken your own medicine? Can you give me some examples of when, just when you think about wellness and your own well-being as a leader in your company, as well as, you having to be at optimal performance so that when you're actually showing up with your clients, they're getting, more than what they paid for. Can you tell me a little bit about what your daily routine looks like, how that's changed in the last few months, and just kind of what your daily practices are like that keeps you at such high performance levels?
Well, thank you. That's a great question, because I think this is a time where we have to remember that, this is not a co-vacation, that this is a new world in which we're living, and we have to maintain our routines. So for me, it's really about maintaining routine. I still get up at the same time. Actually, I'm getting up later. I don't go because I'm not going to the gym. I usually get up. Oftentimes I will get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and now I'm actually sleeping until 5:30. But the first part of my day is always based on physical activity. And then actually I meditate, and then I do physical activity, and then I eat a healthy breakfast before I come to work.
Is that a Vipassana practice, or is it some other type of meditation? Mindfulness, or? It's
just a mindfulness meditation practice, and it's short. Doesn't have to be too long, just enough to get me grounded for the day. And what's nice about those routines is that, that's the only thing that is different is this time of year, I would typically be going to the gym, or I would be rowing, and my rowing club is also closed. So I've had to, be creative with my physical activity. I've been taking walks. I'm listening to books, which I, do other times of year as well when I'm not rowing. And I'm just making sure that I'm maintaining my physical activity. So for me, it's about maintaining my routines, because I think the routines are really the important element that keep us grounded. And for me, starting my day with routines of self-care are the things that give me the energy I need to be able to be on and be there for everybody in my life who depends on me.
So I understand, I'll pick up the walking thread. I understand that you walked a 100-mile section in the Camino del Santiago.
I did. Yeah, that's one of my long hikes. Yeah.
So what did you do to keep motivated on those 100 miles?
Well, it actually wasn't hard at all. It was done over a 10-day period of time. And the Camino de Santiago is a pilgrimage route. The typical route through Spain runs about 500 miles, 750 or so kilometers. And I only did a 10-day trek of it because I'm still working, and it's the amount of time that I wanted to devote to it. And what was so fascinating about it is that everything is new and changing, and you're just walking from village to village and seeing what's around you and taking in nature. And the first 9 days of it felt like a meditative walk, because we were just walking through the beautiful countryside, through these little villages and hamlets, seeing people, interacting with locals, just being able to hear the birds and smell the eucalyptus forests and hear the cuckoo birds sing, which was a new experience for me. So there was, it was just such a sensory experience. It was really fun.
I have a friend. I used to live in Asia and in Hong Kong, and he did the, I think, almost the full Camino. He did the Via Francigena. He got, I forget where that starts in, I think Cannes in France or something. He walked all the way from France to Rome. That was, I think it was last summer or the summer before.
Wow.
He also has done the coast to coast walk in the UK. That one seems really interesting to me. I would really like to do that coast to coast walk, mainly because I understand the pubs are really good.
You'd have no trouble being motivated there, right?
Yeah. One who used to travel can dream, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
well, and like you, Matt, you know, sorry, Drew, I do love to travel. And, you know, it's one of my passions is being able to, you know, explore new countries. And, you know, walking is just, you know, what better way to get to know a place than to walk it. So it's just one of those things I enjoy.
Yeah, I know. Usually if I'm jet lagged and I'm in some foreign country, one of the things I try to do, like the first couple days I'm there, especially the first day, like I find if I can do it on the first day, it sets me up for like almost no jet lag, is like really getting there and really getting like a really high intensity run in. And then you also get to see the area around. It's kind of one of my tricks of the trade, if you will.
That's great.
So, you know, how have you kind of dealt with in the last 15 years, or even during your management consulting journey, how have you dealt with taking on too much and getting overwhelmed?
Oh, you're asking the recovering perfectionist that question, are you? I think, you know, well, it's hard sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to, you know, I've been a person who's always, you know, been an overachiever. You know, I can do anything kind of person, you know, and I feel like there are times where I have to understand what my capacity is, where I need to set boundaries, learning to say no. I think we all, to a certain extent, have some, you know, issues. Many of us do have issues with saying no and setting boundaries. So I've just, over time, I think, you know, call it maturity, call it whatever, you know, that you just reach a point where you have to recognize how to prioritize, you know, understand. Sometimes you just have to say yes and, or yes and not now, and just be able to do what's right for you. Because otherwise you're just going to, I know when I was in my 20s, I used to run at this crazy pace until I literally was exhausted. And then I would stop and sleep for like 4 days. My body would just give out. And I was young and I was like, why am I burning out like this? But it's so bad for our health if we don't take the time to prioritize, take care of ourselves as part of that, and not get overwhelmed.
What are some of your rules for saying no? How do you, what kind of thought process do you go through before you find yourself saying yes to everything, I guess?
Well, I think the two things that I have to often stop and ask myself are, how does this align with my goals? What it is that I've said I'm setting out to do in my life right now or this year, whatever the time frame may be. And how does it align with my values? And if I'm in alignment with those two things, then I find myself often saying yes. And if I'm out of alignment with either of those things, then I have to stop and question whether it's the right time for me to be doing that or it's the right thing for me to do it all.
No, I think that's now getting to where your actual values and your goals are, that can be kind of a lengthy process to figure that out, though. maybe,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I think, it's interesting because when I was going through my career change, when I decided that living on the road for 100% of the time was not the way I wanted to live my life, I hired a life coach and I worked with that coach for a number of years and, looking at values and understanding what's important to me and, what are the things that really nurture me, what makes me feel good, so that I can recognize that, as we get to that place where if we've got competing commitments or we aren't making the time for ourselves, I can reflect on that and I go, oh yeah, I need to get out in nature on a regular basis because that nurtures my soul and gives me energy. So just, it is a process, and I think it's an important process for people to go through. And I think if you look at your life, you can see what are those things that are the values that have driven you from, probably most of your life. Maybe you haven't articulated them or labeled them, but I think when you take the time to reflect on that, then you can find what those are and how they how they've played a role in your life.
Yeah. So let's see where we should go here. I think a lot of people, they felt in the last, they felt early on, maybe in that March, early April timeframe, that there was this buzz of activity, right? Everything was in a weird way exciting, also kind of scary. But if you were a leader in a company at that point, or kind of a critical component, you definitely felt like you were riding some sort of adrenaline high. I think what at least happened to me, and I can't speak for everyone, but it seems like there is been a shift of where we thought this thing was just going to kind of be over. And, best case scenarios, I'm seeing, we're not going to be like at a zero case level for maybe till next year. We're in this kind of for the long haul at this point. And so as you shift from that high energy kind of high activity level into this, wow, now we're in a marathon. What kind of framing have you found that's been helping you in that? And what about how to help our companies and to maintain motivation through that long haul? Everyone, hey, it's a crisis. You can get a lot of people and a lot of energy to come together and focus on a problem and solve a problem. And there's a lot of activity, but to sustain that for a long time is a totally different thing.
Well, it's such a good point, Drew, because I think the hard part has been really understanding the time frame and getting our mindset has been changing so often. First it was an hour to hour thing, then it was a day to day thing, then a week to week, and now more of a month to month kind of thing. And we still don't know. I live in a city where, we don't know when we're going to be coming out from under this and when we'll be free to roam. And so the hard part is that we've got no playbook for this. So we've got to remember that, this is not anything that there's a script for. We're learning every day as we go. And for leaders, as we think about what the workplace is going to look like after we get through the worst of this, and you're right, it's not going to be, this isn't going to be just the worst of it and it's done. We're not going to have a done, if ever, because we are probably going to be, similar to the way, if you think about this from the terrorism perspective, our lives changed when terrorism became more of an everyday thing. There's, precautions that we take now. There's a different type of normal that we have in our lives. And that is going to be the same way for us going forward. Our workplaces of the future are different, will be different, and are different than they were 6 months ago or 3 months ago. And we have to be prepared for that. And there's a lot of planning that needs to go into this from the safety perspective, from a health perspective, and from a well-being perspective. And that it's going to take time and planning. And unfortunately, it's also going to take some money to be able to do this right. Because we all know that, and it's in some cases it's we hope it's not just rhetoric that employers say that the employees are their most important asset. but we know that employers can't achieve their business objectives without their employees. So they do have to make that a priority to be able to take care of them in the way that is appropriate.
Did you happen to catch Jeff Bezos's statement after his earnings report last week?
I didn't. No.
No, it was really interesting. He almost spent the whole time talking about what they were doing to actually protect their employees, which I've heard some speculation. I mean, it's like the ultimate gangster move, right? So at the heart, Amazon is a supply chain company. And so if they have like the first totally protected, like COVID-free supply chain, that's just gonna wipe out everyone else. So if they're going to be able to say, hey, look, you can give us your products and we're going to be able to get them to the customer and we're going to be able to do it better than everyone else. But he talked a lot about all the initiatives that they're doing. Also the hazard pay that they're giving employees. Well, where's your feeling on hazard pay during these times, especially for kind of production or frontline employees?
Well, I think hazard pay is a recognition of the difficulties that everyone's going through. And if an organization can afford to do that, I think it's the right thing to do, as long as it's not being done as a way to just mask over the fact that employees are being mistreated in that situation. So if they're, being asked to work, under excruciating circumstances, or extensive amounts of hours, so it has to be done with the right intention.
Okay. I think that, and that right intention, and then as well as the right communication strategy, you think to wrap around that.
Of course, always. Yeah. Communication, people often forget about the whole importance of communication until it's not done right. But communication, and I see this with some of my clients right now, communication has been just such a critical part of creating a workplace that really shows it cares for its people. When an employer is being very proactive, like literally daily communications about what's happening, what's changing, what do we need to be concerned about, all of those kinds of things, so that the workforce is informed and that they know what's going on. It's in that absence of communication that people will make up their own stories, and they'll make up whatever wild story comes to mind, based on no facts, probably. So the communication is such an incredibly important role in all of this.
Awesome. Well, let's get into your book a little bit. Why don't you kind of tell everybody what it's about? It's kind of an interesting premise. So go ahead and tell us what it's about.
Sure. So the book title again is The Thriving Hive: How People-Centric Workplaces Ignite Engagement and Fuel Results. And it's written in a parable format. So it's an easy, short story to read. And I chose the parable format because what I was trying to do was really to create the picture of the workplace the way that we might not want it to be, but unfortunately a number of people live in those kinds of workplaces. And I call that workplace the dive hive, as opposed to the kind of workplace that nurtures and looks after their people and their employees and creates a thriving workplace where people can really bring their best and be their best. And I call that the alive hive. So as you can tell from the name, it's set in two beehives, the alive hive and the dive hive. And it compares the dive hive, where the only focus is profit and making the numbers, as opposed to in the alive hive, where there is a leader who really clearly articulates the purpose and mission of the organization, which in this case happens to be the bee's job is to pollinate the plants so that there's fruit and vegetables on the plates of the families that live in the area where that beehive is. And that bigger mission, that bigger purpose in life, is something that the employees can recognize that they're tied to that, and everybody's job supports making that happen. And the purpose is really just to show that there are these two contrasting experiences, and how when we create a culture in a workplace where we really look after people, where we can help them feel connected to the purpose of the organization and create a workplace where people want to be, that we will indeed fuel engagement and also contribute to the bottom line.
So without giving away too much, how do we do that?
Well, we've talked about some of it already, actually. Well, at the heart of it is purpose. So what's the organization's purpose, and how can you create that purpose in the organization so that there are elements that, it's outward looking, it contributes to the greater good of the world. It's not inward focused. And purpose is then supported by values. So what are the values of the organization, and how do they serve the purpose? And from that, the culture is then shaped. So the behaviors, the norms, what takes place, the rituals, all of the things that take place within an organization then support the values and the purpose. And then at the operational level, there's really things like what we talked about already with communication. So how do we communicate in a way that is going to be transparent, that's going to help people really understand what's going on and where they fit in with what's happening. Also, the other elements include collaboration. So how do we work together as teams? One of the things that happens in the book is there's a catastrophe. So, think of that as, it's not like the pandemic, but for the people the bees that were experiencing it was a catastrophe. So how do they address being able to work together and collaborate in a situation that could be catastrophic to them? And then the last piece is, how do we celebrate? How do we celebrate? And this is going to be an interesting piece going forward. And I'm already hearing conversations about this with clients and colleagues. Is this time to celebrate? Can we celebrate something when there's been so much death and grief and sadness associated with this illness? And how do we recognize the contributions? So recognition and celebration go closely together. How do we recognize the contributions of the individuals? And these are in our organizations, in our communities, in our families, who have done so much to make us safe and keep us healthy, and done what we needed to have done.
Yeah, So on some of the rituals piece, we've definitely had some change around here. We're pretty well known because we have a happy hour that starts at 4:00 every Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So that went virtual. We also do kind of monthly potlucks. We haven't been able to quite figure out the potluck idea in a safe way yet. But we do kind of like quarterly catered lunches for our State of Grace. So we had that actually a couple weeks ago, and then we had Panera go out and deliver food to all of the employees that they could actually reach. So we tried to at least keep it up a little bit, but it is, you have to be like way more intentional.
Oh, yes. Very intentional. Yeah. And that's the thing is, you have to plan further ahead. It's not like just putting one order into Panera and it shows up in the conference room at noon. How do you get that to all those people in the different places that they are spread over a geographic area?
Yeah. Now, I love Panera.
It's much different.
If anyone's from Panera watching, this doesn't mean to be a dig on you guys, but I really wish that one of the issues that we ran into is like there was no kind of local restaurants that were really willing to be able to do that kind of delivery service, and so I didn't really want to like give the business to a national chain, but it was like the only one that we could. We even thought about if we did it with like Uber Eats or something, but you can't put in like 50 orders, like going to different locations and manage that. So it was a little hectic, but that's at least a little bit of the ways that we are. I mean, most of our teams now have started daily stand-ups, even teams that once upon a time didn't have them. I think our customer service team and our production team, they always kind of had daily stand-ups because that's a relatively fast-moving, day-by-day environment, whereas, the outside sales team, they did more of a weekly call, but now we've started daily stand-ups. What other kind of routines are you seeing or advocating for in companies, or how have they changed?
Well, I think your stand-ups or your team huddles or whatever name they go by are such an important part of, the rituals and behavior that you have. It's important for a number of reasons. One, it's a key communication point. So my team and I, have done this for years where, we'll be on a daily, we actually only met once a week. We did a Monday morning team huddle, and, we connect. And so the other piece is, this is an important connection piece. So making sure that you're checking in with people and that they're doing okay. So those are important elements. And I think it's really important to maintain those kinds of rituals, because it's those that provide the consistency, the things you can count on. So you got to remember right now that stress is really, really high. And our mental well-being is really threatened in a lot of ways, because there's so many things we feel like we can't control. So, we are in a very stressful environment. So when you have things that are regular like that people can expect, I know what's going to happen at the beginning of every day or the end of every day, however often it happens, that becomes something that you feel like you can count on, that it's sort of within your control to be there. And those are the important things we're going to have to keep in mind as we move forward.
So for people who are working in big industrial manufacturing sites that, are typically managing hourly employees, that, let's say they're operating equipment or their maintenance teams that are fixing things, but either way, they're kind of essential workers. There's obviously this psychological component, which I want you to dig into a little bit about, being there and caring for your workers and what that looks like and what kind of best practices, but also how do we also increase engagement and get more out of those guys that, they have so much knowledge, or they have ideas that's not necessarily, they haven't been sharing or, in the past. I just love to hear your thoughts more on those industrial workers.
Sure. It's so interesting. And I think some of this will apply to all situations, not just industrial situations and not just for the hourly workers. But I think one of the things we have to remember right now is that we are in a very dire economic situation as a result of the pandemic. There is financial stress that many people are feeling. So if you take some of these lower wage or hourly wage workers, they may go home to a workplace where half of the income is gone or more, because they might have multiple people in that household that provide support and provide income. So financial well-being may be a huge stress and a stressor that we need to be aware of. So human resource professionals in these work settings should start to look for signs like, for example, if people are taking loans against their 401ks or their retirement plans, that's a signal that there's financial stress. So being aware of that at a basic level. So think of this as Maslow's hierarchy, right? So Maslow's pyramid kind of thing. And at the very base of that pyramid are things like, food, shelter, and clothing. And we're functioning, for many people, they're functioning right now at that level. They may not be able to make their rent payments or their mortgage. They might not know where the food is going to come from for their family if they're subject to this change in their income. So we really have to be thinking at basic levels. And in doing that, we need to recognize that a lot of people are going to be stressed. And we have to understand that not everybody responds to stress the same way. When I get stressed, I go for a walk, right? And that's not how everybody responds. Some people might be, if they're tobacco users, they might be smoking more, they might be eating more, they might be drinking more. There's a lot of different reactions that people are going to have and use different coping mechanisms. So we have to be really watching for those things, because certainly in an industrial environment, some of those elements, especially anything related to the use of drugs or alcohol, can present safety issues. So managers really need to be cognizant of this and watching for this. And one of the things I think, an approach that I'm seeing some of my my clients take is to really start to be in touch with your workforce. Ask them, what do they need? What's the issue that they're dealing with right now? And how can we support you in this? And it may not be that you can solve all of the problems, but there might be some ways in which you can address them. Employers are having to make a lot of concessions, and they're doing things like changing their benefit plans so there's no co-pays, so that there's less out-of-pocket expense for employees. They might be having employees who are getting sick have other, if they don't have enough, if that employee doesn't have enough sick time, they're pooling their sick time so employees can, donate their sick time to other employees. There's a lot of creative things that are going on to really be able to find ways to support employees. And we have to remember that, businesses may be in trouble too. They may be barely keeping the doors open. So we have to recognize that there's issues at a lot of different levels, and we just need to be creative about how we find solutions to those.
So what would your advice be to Tyson right now? With, I'm in Iowa, and most of our cases are related to either long-term care facilities for older folks, or the big news is basically the Tyson plants having outbreaks, which, yesterday was a new thing. We can't just go and buy as much meat as we want anymore. Which is, I guess that hasn't happened since my grandparents coming out of World War II. I don't think there wasn't rationing in during Korea, or maybe there was in Korea, but definitely not in Vietnam. So this is like a once in a lifetime thing where you're not just able to just go to the store and buy what you want. So obviously now you can get into whether or not eating vegetables is actually going to be like a better long-term solution for our society than eating the big T-bone. But that's not the point of this podcast. So I'm just wondering so if you're dealing with some massive stressful situation, these workers at Tyson right now, the person who works next to them, chances are, came down with it, and there's people literally dying from their cohort, at the facility. how do you even begin to rectify that situation?
Yeah, this is why, it's such an unusual situation. We're fighting the invisible enemy that we can't see. And this is what makes it so hard. And especially when you're in an industrial setting like that, where the working conditions are such that people are very close together. It's not an option. How are they going to have to impact their capacity if they're going to do social distancing? And in some cases, it's just impossible to do. This is where employers really have to work hard at the health and safety protocols that they put in place, and being able to really help them understand, really show to the employees that they're doing everything possible. And that's not to say that it's going to get to, to a place where there aren't going to be any infections, because still people can bring that in from the community. They could bring it in from home, but they've really got to have, those essential elements in place, just as they've done, consider it frontline kinds of things, as they've done in hospitals, in what they're doing with first responders, and even to a certain extent, not quite as much, but to a certain extent, the grocery store. They're part of the essential part of the food supply chain in this country. And I think it's really surprising to some of us, and, also disheartening, when you walk through the grocery store and you see these completely empty shelves, and you go, why has that happened? And looking at what the supply chain issues are. So I think we're really starting to see that we have, I was just reading an article about this morning in the New York Times about, where we have fragile aspects to the supply chains in some industries. So I think it's incumbent on the employers to really do, first and foremost, what do they have to do to look after the people? Because without their people, they can't run that business. So they've got to be able to put their health and safety first, so that it in the long run protects the business.
One thing I thought that you said that was really profound a few minutes ago was about looking for people who are borrowing against a 401k. Are there any other signs that you really, as a manager or as a leader should be looking at, either like that or just other types of behavioral signs?
Well, there's certainly a lot of ways that stress shows up. And, whether that's, whether the source of that stress is financial, using that example as a 401k is just a metric that's available. I tend to be a person who, likes to work from data and have metrics to look at things, but also to be able to, that's a kind of, early indicator, hopefully not a lagging indicator as to where people are having problems. I think more often it's going to show up in the behavioral things. It's how people are responding. This is where managers, need to really be paying attention to how are people, showing up in work. Are they, getting their work done? And this is not like a micromanaging kind of thing. This is a caring for the people thing. Are they able to meet their requirements? Are they showing up? Are they, their same usual vivacious self? And if they're not, starting to understand and offer in an empathetic and a compassionate way to ask, how's it going for you? Drew, how are you doing with all of this? How are you and your family holding up? And really, taking that caring approach, because you're going to see the signs, you're going to see the behavioral change. You're going to see the person who's, defensive or short in their conversations with people. And it's going to show. So this is why we really have to be paying attention to some of these things. And one of the things I'm seeing, and this came up in the conversations with the hospital well-being managers, was around creating peer systems, peer-to-peer support. So, you and I might be peers, Drew, and, you and I touch base periodically, and I check in on you and you check in on me. And, if I hear you starting to have some issues, then I'm there to be able to support you. So I have some questions I might ask to just listen for, what are the kinds of responses that might be signals that might say, oh, Drew's not coping so well as I thought he might be with this. So peer support is another key element of being able to do this. But we just have to be cognizant of what are the kinds of things that are reactions that people can have, and how are they coping? This whole coping mechanism element is an important one.
I think that idea of peer support is such a beautiful idea, because if there's anything that this whole thing has taught us, it's like how interconnected we all were. There never has maybe been a time in history where we were actually so disconnected from each other, but because we're all hiding behind our phones and we're all going about our lives, and everyone's so busy, and and then it's like now it's just apparent that wow, everything that someone else does is affecting me, and it is that kind of idea we're all in it together. And I think that those peer networks are a really interesting way to make sure that your people are getting cared for.
And it's what's nice about it too is then it's not just the manager's job. It makes a connection at a different level for people. Yeah. And I think that can be a really important piece, to know that somebody else is really, caring for me.
So what other leading indicators should we be specifically or especially paying attention to right now?
Well, the two that we've talked about, so the financial well-being is going to be a big element, and then the mental well-being. So the mental well-being is just going to be such an important part going forward, where if we're not paying attention to this now, we really need to. Many larger employers have programs such as an employee assistance program, where an employee and their family members can, utilize this service to get support on a variety of topics. So it's not just mental well-being or mental health topics. It's on a variety of topics. And in smaller employers that don't have those kinds of resources, they can look to the community and see if there are community resources that might be available to support them. So I think the financial well-being and the mental well-being are going to be the two big pieces that we really need to be focusing on. But we also have to remember that our lives are going to be different in the workplaces that we're going to be going to, should we be going to them, if that's even an option in the future. There's going to be different protocols that are going to be in place. The extent to which we have social interactions, and the changes that employers are going to have to make just to create safe workplaces for their employees are going to be profound. And we're going to have new policies, we're going to have new rituals, we're going to have new communications that are going to have to take place. And I think this is where what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients is, what do employers have to be thinking about today to be ready to open whenever that might be? And putting in place all of those elements that are going to really make it safe for the employees, for any visitors in that business, any customers in that business, and to be able to make sure that that business can sustain.
So I want to shift to the work from home piece.
Sure.
Well. So talk to me about well-being when working from home. What are some best practices? I mean, on a real tactical level. Okay, I'm sitting at home now for 8 hours, 9 hours. What should I be doing to maintain that energy level? What should I be doing to take care of myself mentally? Talk me through that a little bit.
Well, the whole work from home piece has been an interesting piece over the last month and a half, in that so many employees were forced into this situation, and employers were forced into this situation, not by choice. And some organizations were ready for this because they've been moving towards this over time, and others were just thrust into it with little preparation. And depending on, where you were in that spectrum, will make a determination as to whether this has been excruciating for you or whether it's just been a day without the commute. I think from the well-being perspective, it's so interesting because I'm really curious how many people are going to come out of this situation and say, my well-being is actually better now than it was before.
Mm.
The stress of the commute is gone. The stress of the balancing, now the balancing work and life, that's going to vary. Now, if you're at home with, 3-year-old twins, or
two boys under the age of 4.
There you go. Okay, close, right? Yeah. So so this is what's so interesting, because when I talk to friends that have children at home, it varies, because even if they're young children versus college age children, that's an additional element of responsibility, and it's that nonstop 24 hours a day thing. Whereas parents don't normally have the nonstop 24-hour a day thing, except when they're really young. And so I think that's another important place to understand, what the stressors are. At a family level, this is where communication is so important. Who's got responsibility for the kids right now? How do you get your work done? How do you get on and do a live podcast, when you've got small kids in the house, or dogs barking, or any of those kinds of things? So I think we have to, again, understand, and this is where, empathy and compassion and flexibility are becoming much more part of our lives in the work from home setting, because we don't know how well you are coping with this or not, unless you tell me, or I see some behavioral cues that might be saying, it's going well or it's not. And so, managers and leaders really have to, again, be in touch with their workforce, understand what their needs are, be able to support them in a way that can be productive for everyone. So you're still getting your job done, but you're also being able to manage your life well.
Yeah, I would say my wife and I, we definitely started up a bit of a new ritual. I mean, you get home and you always, how was your day? but now it's like we're a lot more. I mean, I've been coming into the office maybe 60, 70% of the time because there's not really anyone else here. So, except for our production team in the production area and a couple other people in the office. But, so but I've been a lot more intentional. And she has been to me too, of like, how are you doing with all of this right now? How are you feeling about it? Like, are you feeling cooped up? Do we need to try to get out? Should we try to go find somewhere to go for a hike? Should we, should we go for a bike ride? What can we do to like help through that feeling and come up with a little bit more plan, a little bit stronger of a plan. I'm wondering, are there other kind of tips on the working from home? I mean, is it should you be, I know you exercise in the morning. I tend to actually exercise in the middle of the day. But, has there been how often should you be kind of getting up? Should you be trying to at least engage with other coworkers by just giving them a call to chat for a few minutes? I mean, are there any other kind of tips you have?
Well, those are all great suggestions. So keeping a routine is an important thing. As I mentioned, I get up at the same time every day. And making sure you stay in those routines. If you weren't physically active before, here's a chance to become physically active. It's almost everybody this time of year can get outside and go for a walk. Take the dog for a walk, or just download an audio book and take it for a walk, or finding a way to be physically active. So that's going to help with your energy, as well as also keeping in mind what we're eating. This is, I found this personally in the first month. It was like, oh, this is only going to be a month. We'll be done. I'll be back to my regular exercise routine. No worries. I can eat whatever I want. And then there's a sudden realization like, no, this is going to be longer than we thought it was going to be. And what are they calling it now? The COVID-10 or the quarantine 15 or something like that. So there's names for all of this weight gain that's going on. So keeping in mind what we're eating, being creative with, trying new things. We've got perhaps more time to be able to cook some of those recipes that you don't have time to do on a normal basis, and making those important connections with family, with colleagues. I'm seeing far more neighbors outside, so there's more community connections. So taking advantage of those times, sitting at your desk for hours on end is not going to be good for anybody. You've got to take breaks. And when you take those breaks, make sure you're doing something that's going to rejuvenate yourself. So when you come back, you're refreshed, even if it's just to step outside and, breathe in and the hopefully sooner warm air, and get a little bit of sunshine. So we've got to really look after ourselves in all of this.
No, I think that's really great. Well, this has been super insightful. What else do you think we should keep in mind, or what would you like to ask the listeners for, besides going out and buying the Thriving Hive right now?
Well, it's the Thriving Hive is available on Amazon in paperback, and it's also in Audible and in a downloadable Kindle format. So if you need something to take on a walk, this is a nice short book. It's about 3 hours on Audible, so it's an easy listen. Really just, for everybody to take care of themselves. Look after and nurture the people that are around you. Look after your colleagues. And, as leaders and HR professionals and the people that are really have the responsibility for, making sure that the people are looked after in an organization, let's make sure we know what the people need so that we can look after them and create that caring workplace that there is the kind of place they're going to want to work for a long time.
No, I think that's great advice. And, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully, you'll be back on the Camino at some point.
I hope so soon. Drew, it's been a pleasure spending time with you today. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much.